In this activity, we want to be able to build our own databases. In other words, starting from scratch or amending another document to be able to add some unique information. What we have here is one of the databases that I put on the website. It's basically a database of elemental information. Just to review, we have, again, the category or field headers up here, and then the individual records here, and this has all the major elements in the periodic table. Now, first thing you might want to do is select a cell right here and go ahead and freeze that right there. By doing so, then the category headers as well as the elements will stay put. So if I can move like this, you can see that, again, the element names stay put. And similarly, if you scroll down, the symbols stay put. So that's a very important thing to be able to do, just to be able to keep those things stationary. Now, when we're dealing with a document like this, there can be a number of different tabs. The one that I'm showing you here has tabs that show different tables of the properties. So you could scroll through these on your own. But I just put in different data in different formats into the spreadsheet. The one we're looking at right here is the main one, Properties 1. Now, let's say I wanted to add in information on like the relative abundance of these elements. So I could do some research on this and see exactly what the abundance is. I'm pulling this up off of the internet. This happens to be a Wikipedia article. And this one here is called Abundance of Chemical Elements. And first of all, you can see that if you're to get a relative abundance of elements in the universe, you can see that hydrogen is the most common and helium is the second most. And of course, that's because all your stars are primarily made of hydrogen, which through the process of nuclear fusion produces helium. Then some of the other elements that we're more familiar with, like oxygen, carbon, and so forth, are also relatively abundant in the universe. But looking through the article, we can see that if we were to look at the relative abundance of the elements in the ocean water, you can see that hydrogen and helium don't appear here. Obviously, water is H2O, so that would be the part that would be found right here. There's the hydrogen, there's the oxygen. And this table here is on proportion by mass. Since oxygen is much more massive than hydrogen, that's why these numbers are disproportionate. But let's say I wanted to put this information into that spreadsheet so I could use it and sort when necessary in terms of teaching a lesson on the value of knowing the periodic table and knowing the elements. In other words, how common are these? What are they used for? What's their significance in nature? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the elemental abundance in the ocean. We can look at the elemental abundance in the human body, and we can look back up here and say the elemental abundance in the universe. And let's go ahead and make our own table. Now, these are already in tables, but they're all formatted differently, and so we need to copy over some of that information and create our own. So working in a spreadsheet, you can create a tab right here by saying that you would like to, so rather I should say insert a new sheet. So go over to insert and put in a new blank sheet. So now we can see at the bottom this workbook is composed of a number of individual worksheets. So Properties 1 is one worksheet, that's the one you're seeing right here. Sheet 3, which is labeled right here, is currently blank, and so we're going to rename this one right here, and we're going to call this Abundance. So now we're creating a new worksheet in an existing workbook. Again, for your assignment, you could start totally from scratch and create a new workbook, but you may choose just to amend an existing worksheet in an Excel document like some of the ones I posted on the website. So in this particular assignment, we're working still with elements, so I'm going to click on the first tab, Properties 1, and I'll highlight these columns that I want to copy over: the element name, the symbol, the atomic number. Notice I can highlight the entire column by clicking on the A, B, and C. Similarly, if I was picking up a row, I would click on the numbers to the left, and that'll highlight the entire column. So in this case, I want to pick up the information that's in column A, as well as column B, as well as column C. And I'll say I want to copy that information. So I'm going to copy that information. I'm going to put it over here into abundance. First, I'll enlarge this to make it a little bit easier for you to read. So I'll put this up here to 150. And then moving to the very top cell, I'll say edit, paste. So now we have that information there just as before. Once I do, again, I'm going to click over here, I'm going to go to Windows, and I want to freeze the pane, which will freeze this category headers as well as the element names themselves. Now I'm simply going to go back to that Wikipedia article and start to look at some of the data. So for example, the 10 most common elements in the Milky Way galaxy. So these would presumably be the most common elements also in the universe, although we're not certain for sure. So I could copy this information over here, but because the table is already established and the order is different from this right here, I'm simply going to copy the information in here. And I'm going to use the mass fraction in parts per million. So in other words, out of 1 million atoms and so forth, or I should say 1 million mass units that you're going to have, approximately 739,000 of those units, or 73.9%, is going to be composed of hydrogen. So I would take the 793,000 here, I'd copy this, and I'll put this over under hydrogen. So right now, this is going to be parts per million at the top. So there's out of 1 million parts, 793 of those are going to be composed of hydrogen. Now I could repeat that process for all of the elements in that particular field. I don't need to show you all of that right now. I'll just copy it over and then progress to the next category. So now we can show the data that I just copied over here. And we're now showing in parts per million of about 739,000 of those are hydrogen. You can see by comparison only 440 of those would be sulfur. Now, in this particular assignment, you're developing your own database, and so you want to practice some of the features that are, or some of the techniques that are necessary to making one, and at least making one easy to understand. So I'm going to choose this entire row across the top here, and I'll say I want to make that entire one here now yellow. And so that kind of stands out, maybe a little bit too bright, not a big deal. You can go back and you can change it to adjust to whatever colors you want. So now to actually make this sortable, in other words, to be able to do some kind of record selections on this, I can select this row right here, and I can say that I'd like the data, okay, to be filterable. So if I'm going to click over here and say filter, then you can see those arrows coming in, and now we can sort. So I'm going to sort on abundance in terms of parts per million. I'll sort descending, and you notice it groups all of those ones right in a column there of the 10 most abundant elements in the universe. Now, parts per million is not something that's easy for most people to kind of conceptualize. It's hard to conceptualize a million parts. So we're going to express it in terms of percent abundance here. So this is going to be percent abundance, and this is going to be percent in the universe. Okay, so percent in the universe. So to do this, I'm going to do a simple calculation. I'm going to take whatever this value is in this cell here. I'm going to make that equal to the total parts per million here divided by a million itself. So I'm just going to type in there a million, one with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 zeros. When I enter there, we can see if we express this as a percent, which we will do by clicking at the category header, the column header here, and saying percent. We can see it's about 74% of the universe is hydrogen. Now I really don't want to have to do that same formula all the way down, so I'm going to simply select this one, and dragging from this lower corner where that little blue box appears, I'll drag this down, and I've just filled in the percentages. You can see here that by comparison with hydrogen, helium, and oxygen, basically virtually none of the universe is composed of the other elements. Now, again, I could take that over there and I could adjust that by increasing the decimals. In other words, I can click like this, and you can see that if I clicked over 2, I'm now listing these here with some actual measurable values relative to hydrogen. If I didn't go to that 2 decimal places, it would have been difficult to differentiate between the abundance of these elements in the universe. The next category we're going to enter here is abundance in terms of the solar system. So the first was the universe, at least how we perceive it, primarily from information from the Milky Way. This next data is going to be the percentance, the abundance of particular elements and their isotopes in the solar system. So I could do the same thing. This is also a mass fraction in parts per million. In other words, of the total number of, out of 1 million grams, 705,700 of those would be composed of hydrogen. So I can take that information, highlight it, and copy it, and I'll go back over to the spreadsheet right here and put it in the category there for hydrogen. So in the universe, out of a ppm, in terms of the universe, is 739 out of a million. The parts per million in the solar system is going to be considerably less. And again, we'll fill in this column just the way we did the other. Not surprisingly, the most common elements in the solar system mirror the most common elements in the universe, with hydrogen being the most common, followed by helium and so forth in terms of mass. Again, we can do the same procedure we did before. We're going to title this category here percent in the solar system, and we'll simply divide everything by 1,000,000 because these are parts per million. So I'll say equals starts a calculation, and then by clicking on the particular cell I'm interested in, F2, which is, in other words, how many parts per million of hydrogen are there, and there's 705,700 parts per million of hydrogen. I'm going to divide that by 1,000,000, 1 with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 zeros. And so we can see here, if I take this data and I copy it down again by grabbing that little box, when the cursor changes, I'm ready to copy it, and I can just drag it down. And we can see that this is in, everything here is taking the value and dividing by 1,000,000. To express this in percent, I will just put over here, actually this should be parts per million, okay, parts per million in the solar system, and this one right here, I'm sorry, this column here represents the fractional percent of the abundance in terms of mass of these elements in the solar system. So here I'm going to say percent in the solar system, and now I need to change this category here to percent. So I'm going to select all of column G, click on percent, and now we have a basis for comparing it with the percent in the universe. So I'm going to again add more decimals, 1, 2, and now we can compare the abundance of the most common elements in the universe versus those in the solar system. Now what I think is healthy to do is to give some kind of a reference to students so they can see that we're really talking about different things here. You could do it by changing the color. So in this case, I'm going to select these 2 columns right here that both deal with the percent or the parts per million in the universe. And I'll change this to another color, so I'll change this one to a light green. Okay, and then I'll change these 2, which both pertain to the solar system, to something like more of a tan color or something. So slightly different there, but you can tell the difference between those. So we now have the abundance in the universe as well as the abundance in the solar system. We're now able want to go on and add information about the oceans and about the human body. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and then complete the table for you. So now we've entered the data for the percent abundance in the oceans, and you can see it actually looks significantly different from the other two categories. Again, to be able to sort this, I first need to select the row, go up to Datas, and choose Filter. And in this case, I have to do it twice to turn on the filters for the new categories. Again, you can't filter a category until there's a header there, so we'll have to do that again when we enter the other ones. This is already expressed in percent, and so I'm going to say I'd like to sort descending. We see the most common element here in the oceans is not hydrogen but oxygen in terms of mass percent. Now, it makes it hard to compare these things in terms of the two categories to the left because there's a parts per million category and there's a percent in the universe. And so we can just go ahead and hide the parts per million universe. So I'm going to click on this column right here, and if I right click on the column header, I can hide that. And I can do the same over here for the parts per million. Right click, hide that. And now I'm just going to color this in a different color to make this distinct as well. So I'm going to choose over here my fill, and I'll choose a light blue. So now you can see here that the abundance in the universe, the abundance in the solar system, and the abundance in the ocean are now in this table that we're constructing. Let's do one more, and we're going to look for the abundance in the human body. And so if we were to look at our article here, we can scroll through, and here we're going to see the abundance of each of these elements in the human body. And I'll go ahead and enter these now. So now we can see the mass percent in the body. And again, if I wanted to sort by those, I first need to make sure that that column has a filtering option, so I can click on that and say Data, Filter, and again, Data, Filter to turn them all back on. So you might just want to wait until they're all in there before you do that. Now I can sort by this in terms of abundance, most abundant descending, and you can see that the body has about 65% is oxygen, about 18% carbon, and so forth. And that is quite different than the oceans. You can see that the oceans have very little carbon, but 18% of the mass of our body is made out of carbon. And so this is interesting to be able to compare between these different categories. Now when you color a column or a row or a cell, it's hard to see the borders. So we can add those borders or make those borders more visible. If I was to highlight these columns and then select up here the bordering tool, and I'm just going to select the one which is going to border completely around it. It makes it a little bit easier to see for the eye to track across a particular row or down a particular column. So now we've created a database which we can use to compare elements in terms of their mass abundance in the universe. And I can sort by this, and I can see, okay, that the most abundant element in the universe by percent is going to be nitrogen. If I'm carrying this over, if I was to do that, hydrogen is the most abundant in the universe. In the solar system, it's also hydrogen. When we get into the oceans and sort this way, we can see that actually the most abundant element by mass in the oceans is oxygen. And similarly, if I do this by the body, we can see that the most abundant element in the human body or in organisms in general is oxygen. So there's a shift from hydrogen being the most common in the universe and in the solar system to oxygen being the most abundant in the oceans and in the human body, or any organism for that matter. So now we've created a database by which we can sort and do some interesting studies and discussions about the relative abundance of these elements in nature. Notice we didn't put the other elements in here because their percentages are so small that they're really kind of dwarfed by the other ones. But this can be used now as a tool to teach about elements and about their occurrence in nature. So you can make a database in a similar type of fashion to what we're showing here. You can simply add a new tab by going to, say, Insert, sheet and add a new blank sheet. Or you can make one totally from scratch by saying File, New Workbook, and you can start putting your own category or field headers here and then your own record names over there. So whichever you prefer to do. Now you can make databases of a variety of different topics. Right here this is labeled spreadsheets, but spreadsheets and databases again differ in basically their purpose, but they're both tabular. In other words, they're both arranged in rows and columns, and any of your traditional spreadsheet programs like Microsoft Excel can be used as a database, as you've just seen. So we've already looked at nutrition information, we've looked at element information, and again you can see that there's just a lot of different ideas that I've put up here. You could take one of these and modify it by adding a new worksheet, or you can start from scratch, something which is directly relevant to your particular interests. Again, the more you can make this in line with your own teaching interests, the better.